Next Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, and in the Christian world we enter into the Lenten process, which leads us to Palm Sunday and Easter, the day of resurrection. Within the Jewish tradition, we also celebrate Passover. But during this time, therefore, there's a lot of people in the world that are engaged in a spiritual process. And it's always a good idea to take advantage of that and add your own energy to the collective energy in the world. And the traditional question that we have in the Christian world when it comes time for Lent is, what are you going to give up for Lent? What are you going to give up? And so today I'd like to suggest that this Lent we give up our life. Give up our life. At least this is what Jesus recommended that we do. Let me share with you the scripture from Mark 8:34 and 36. He says, he called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, if any wish to come after me, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake, for the sake of the gospel, will save it. So Jesus is recommending that we lose our life. What does this mean? That's the topic for today. Dear friends, welcome. Juan Enrique Toro greeting you on this day, thanking you for the thumbs up, for the subscriptions which help the channel grow, and those wonderful donations which help us keep this channel going. Thank you so very much. So Jesus is recommending that we lose our life in favor of the gospel. What does this mean? Well, some could interpret it to mean that we have to give up everything, even our own lives, to serve God, right? It could mean that it implies self-sacrifice and a rejection of materialism, worldly concerns in favor of spiritual values, right? But I don't think that's what Jesus meant at all. I believe that Jesus was inviting us to step up into a new consciousness, to let go particularly of old identities in order to fully embrace a new perspective of life, to let go of old ways of thinking. Ultimately, he's asking us for a call to transformation, all right? So the question is, well, what does this mean and how do we do it? Because we understand that anytime we're talking about letting go, it always implies some difficulty and some resistance, right? Change always implies resistance. So letting go of old identities can be a very challenging and difficult process indeed. You know, if you ever sat down to do some spring cleaning and you had to let go of things, right? Sometimes it's hard because we identify with the thing. It has a memory for us. It has somebody gifted it to us. It becomes very precious. These things become very precious, and to let go of them seems like we're letting go part of ourselves, and that in itself could be a very difficult process. Now, it's even more difficult when it's something inside of ourselves, an identification that we have. And so during this Lenten season, it really would help if we would take a moments, let's say, to reflect upon our life, to see those things that we've become overly identified with and see where it is that we can effect some change, some transformation, some letting go, to set up new goals and intentions to how to accomplish that surrender and that release. We might even look for support, right? We get the books, the friends, the family, the support system to help us do that. Anytime that we're going to be facing change, we always want to focus on self-compassion. Whenever we encounter things that are difficult for us or painful, we have to stop, we have to take stock of where we are, understand the greater vision that we have. And ultimately what we need to do is come to embrace the new, understanding that the new is really going to help us live a life that's more free, more in alignment with who we think we are. A nice way to think about this is that every time we engage in a spiritual process to help clean out old identities and bring us more into the realization of who we are as a spiritual being, we can use the analogy of a fountain. You know, a fountain will circulate the same water. And a fountain is a good metaphor for us, because what we understand is if the water in the fountain is murky or it's not very good, we want to help purify that. We want to purify the fountain, and it's symbolic of purifying our souls. So when we let go of our burdens, for example, and our fears, and we tend to become more whole, the fountain is being cleaned and purified. And when we release our fears, right, and our doubts and our pain, and eventually that fountain will begin to flow with very clean and pristine water, which reflects the cleansing, right, the transformation of our consciousness and our own freedom. What's important here is that when we set the inside right, when we work on the inside part of ourselves, the outside then will fall into place. And this is a little truth bomb for us today. Our primary reality is within, and our secondary reality is without. Of course, the without reflects the within, but again, the within is our primary reality, which we need to be focused on. So again, how do we do this? Because we can always look at ourselves, and when we look at ourselves or we look at others, many times what we're doing is we're repeating past ideas of who we think we are, who we think the others are. We're not really seeing them for who they are or who we are in the present moment. So one of the exercises that we do is to give up defining ourselves. We define ourselves so strictly. We see ourselves in the context of our age, of our gender, of our history, of the things we've done, of the things we failed to do, the strengths, the weaknesses, all of those identifications. So by stopping to do that, what we do is that we begin to liberate ourselves from the past identification that we have. Because defining ourselves and defining others is very confining. It's very limiting in life. And when we interact with people and we understand that we are more than the role that we're playing with them. I'm not just the father, the employee. I'm not just the man. I'm not just the married individual, the educated individual, the this or the that. Not defined by the role in our interaction, but rather to be sort of a field of conscious presence. In the world of chaplaincy, we call this offering presence, right? The pure state of being, which is free of definitions or limitations or looking at one another. Because we can only, when Jesus says, lose your life in favor of me or the gospel, what he's talking about is losing the concept of self. You can't really lose your life. When we say my life, it's implying a duality, right? It's saying my life. I have a life, right? In other words, if I lose that life, I lose me, right? You can only have what you believe you have. You can only lose what you believe you have. And so if you were to lose your life, you lose yourself. But ultimately, that's not true. You can't ever lose your life because in truth, you are life. Right? I am one with life is one of the most powerful affirmations that we can say. I am one with life. The Father and I are one. God and I are one. Right? I am one with life itself. So I can't lose my life. So when Jesus is saying, lose your life in favor of me is losing the concept of who you think you are, what your life is, or you thought it was, in favor of a more expansive realization of self. This is what he's inviting us to do. And once we identify, in the process of life, if we were to identify with something negative, I've done this in my life, or I've done that in my life, typically that negativity will take it on. And once we take it on as part of our identity, it becomes very difficult to let go, to release, in a deeply unconscious way. We identify with it, and to release it implies that we're releasing our life, ourself. We're losing ourself. And so we feel that, we're actually promoting our own death in a very sort of insane way. But again, there's not possible to lose your life, because you are life. You can only lose your life if you think you have a life. Right? It's a little play on words, but it's an important concept for us to really embrace. I am one with life. I can never lose life because I am life. The body may stop living, right? But life goes on. That's what we say. And so that's what we're talking about today. And Jesus is inviting us to step into that sense of losing our life identification from everything from the past, or our anticipation of the future. Jesus is inviting us to do that. And so we're talking about really an exploration of our mind, right? And for those of us who engage in the spiritual practice of meditation and prayer, we come to understand that we're much more than our mind, right? You're more than your mind. You are something that is very complete and whole. It is a very expansive sense of self when we go beyond the mind. Because when we identify with the mind, we're trapped in time, you see. When we identify with those things that we think we are, we're trapped in time. And again, memory and anticipation, right? Juggling between those two seems to be the only way to live our life. But there is a moment, and it is the present moment, what Eckhart Tolle calls the now, the power of now. It is the moment in which we're free of the memory or anticipation. In the present moment, there's a sense of the true self, right? The expansive self. When we come to realize that I am not the thinker of the thoughts. Very powerful idea for us today. I'm not the thinker of the thoughts. If you can observe your thoughts, and any one of us can observe the thoughts that we're having, we can say, well, there's a thought that I have. As you observe that thought, you realize that you're not the one thinking the thought. If you can observe it, it is not you, right? Because anything that we observe is not us. So the observation of thought proves to us that I am not the thinker of the thoughts. There's something in me that is thinking, and I'm observing it, but the I am, who I am in truth, goes much beyond that. And this is the beginning of our freedom, right? So we might be trapped in our thought, our repetitive cyclical thinking about this situation or that situation or this problem or that problem, this concern, this fear, this worry, this situation, this addiction, whatever it may be. Nevertheless, if we come to understand that we are more than that, that can be the beginning of freedom. And no matter how trapped we may be in the negative consciousness, there are oftentimes sparks of realization, of openness. We may be walking down the street, for example, and we are very concerned about a situation. But suddenly we see a friendly face, maybe a friend of yours, and they may be walking their dog, right? And you take a moment and you look at the dog and you feel very happy. And you might even pet the dog. And suddenly in that experience with the dog and petting the dog and seeing your friend, all of that worry and concern is gone for a moment. For a moment you're free. And in that moment of freedom, in that connection with that dog, in that now moment, you are free. And that is the experience of your eternal self. And if you can have it for that one moment with the dog, we can provoke it or stimulate it within us anytime that we want to become conscious, right? Understanding. I have these worries, I have these concerns, my thoughts are running wild. But I can observe them, and if I can observe them, I realize they're not me. Losing your identification with your mind. That's what Jesus is asking us to do, to come into this transformation. You know, I like very much what he says when he says, take up your cross and follow me, in the scripture that we read today from Mark. Because to me, you know, sometimes people talk about that and they say, well, you know, we want to glorify the pain and the suffering of the cross. To me, that's not what Jesus meant at all. I believe that what Jesus thought is we all have these burdens, these concerns, these identifications with negativity in our life. We all have these problems. And that is the symbol of the suffering of the cross, obviously. But Jesus did not stay on the cross, you see, because he was brought down and on the third day he rose. He demonstrated to all of us that not even death is real, right? And so when he says, take up your cross and follow me, he's saying you have burdens, you have concerns, you have worries, you have fears. Jesus is saying, I have found a way to be free of that, to not give any power to that. As he's inviting us into that consciousness by saying, follow me, but not follow me just to the cross, follow me to the resurrection, to the new life, to the understanding of who I am, right? And this is what this message is all about today. It's an invitation for you to continuously find that present moment, to be free of the repetitive, cyclical thinking mind, to be free of it, to observe it, and to understand what's happening inside there is the nature of a free and peaceful life. It's the nature of the spiritual life. And so that's what we're calling for today. Lose your life. Lose your identification with who and what you think you are, and come to understand that you are just as God created you. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be subtracted from your life. You are the essence of what God created in this world. The absolute beautiful child of God that you are. So, take up your cross. Follow Jesus. Not only to release the cross, but to embrace the resurrection. Juan Enrique Toro greeting you on this day, thanking you for tuning in, thanking you for those wonderful thumbs up, and for those of you very generous souls, thank you for those donations, very grateful for that. And as always, as we go into this Lenten season, remember, life is consciousness, and consciousness is life.